This is Nebraska Farmcast, a production of the Center for Agricultural Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I'm Ryan Evans. As the newly released Nebraska Farm Real Estate Report issued by our Center for Ag Profitability indicated, agricultural land values in the state have continued to climb this year, reaching an all-land statewide average of $3,360 per acre, which represents a 16% increase over last year. These increases are being seen across the region as well, with the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City recently reporting some cropland increases as high as 32% over the previous year. Jim Jansen, an Extension Ag economist and co-author of the Nebraska Farm Real Estate Report, is here to tell us more about cropland values across the central U.S. and what's driving those increases. So, hey, Jim, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Ryan.
So you have a new article up on our website at cap.unl.edu where you walk through some new findings from the Kansas City Fed. What is the latest from them in terms of cropland values in their region, which covers part of the central U.S.?
Yeah, so according to the Kansas City Federal Reserve, they placed the average value of land in Nebraska for the first quarter of 2022 for dryland cropland up about 24% over the prior period, or roughly about a year ago. Surrounding states were either in the low 20s all the way up to the high 20s, or even to west of us, even to the low 30s. It's a fairly robust gain year over year, given the attributes of the economy, such as higher crop prices. During 2021, interest rates were fairly low relative to where they might be headed now. And some of the underlying fundamentals help support some of these values that we're seeing across the Central Plains states.
And we know commodity prices continue to be high. Are these influencing cropland values across the region?
So the value of what we have, whether land for cropland, which we focused on in the article, or even grazing land, relates to the value of what we can do on it. So if we see commodity prices being higher now, different forms of disaster aid of certain types, these things all impact the value of land. And with that being said, we're seeing commodity prices, while they have backed off some for the new crop that we will be harvesting here in a couple months, they still remain quite high relative to the historic average of the last several years. And with that being said, the returns are expected to be possibly higher. Obviously, the inputs associated with raising these crops have been a concern as well. But the difference in profitability compared to even during the onset of the pandemic about 2 years ago, things seem to be much different than they did at that period of time.
And what are some of the other factors that are contributing to higher market values in ag land this year beyond commodity prices and input prices?
Yeah, so beyond prices, we can look at things such as long-term interest rates. Over the past year, while they have edged up some in the last several months, long-term interest rates still remain near historic lows, or quite low relative to historic averages. We also see that the interest in land and assets of various kinds are much higher than what they might have been in the last several years as a hedge against inflationary pressure. With higher inflation rates, we're seeing a renewed look at ways to hedge against inflation, and one approach some might take is buying an asset such as land. And land is also a store of wealth for a family or for a generation. And there's a lot of motivation across the Central Plains states to look at that and continue on that family's legacy. So there's different interest from investors for various reasons, from local farmers, operators, whoever it might be. And a lot of market dynamics are playing into this right now.
And as interest rates continue to climb to combat the inflation that the economy is experiencing, is there anything that you're watching for or expecting to happen in terms of land values going into the next year or two?
In the long run, there tends to be an inverse relationship between the cost of borrowing or the cost of financing land or real estate versus the asset value, meaning as we see higher interest rates, we tend to see potentially lower asset values, all else equal, unless some other factors. So an example, higher commodity prices, exceptional yields, disaster assistance. If there's not some other factor to set off or set aside the pressure that the cost of borrowing can place on land loans. With that being said, we might see maybe a slowing down in the growth rate early on, and maybe we see land markets stabilize at the current levels that we're at right now, and instead of seeing these double-digit, fairly high increases we've seen from year to year.
And how have these increases in land values impacted the operations themselves, the farmers, their bottom lines?
Yeah, so in this article, we didn't focus a lot on cash rental rates, but cash rental rates remained very steady to higher across the state in Nebraska. That's the first thing that impacts a farmer's financial position is the cost associated with either acquiring land, whether through renting or even purchasing. With those operations, based on the survey work that we did here at the University of Nebraska, current farms and ranches still remain the largest purchaser of farm real estate across Nebraska. And with the interest that they have developed, with the demand that they carry forward, they took advantage of the relatively low interest rates. Many farm operations in the last couple of years before interest rates headed back up, if they had debt of various kinds, and maybe took a look at refinancing some of their debt obligations, as the low interest rates made them quite appealing. And financially, if they had money borrowed, having lower interest rates tends to be maybe a more financially favorable position than paying higher interest rates, which would obviously influence their interest cost on various types of debt throughout the year. So a lot of farmers are taking advantage or have taken advantage of some of these market forces. And there's still strong interest and strong demand across the state for farm real estate, whether from actual operators or absentee landowners or investors of various kinds.
And is there anything that you would encourage people in any of those groups to do to prepare for the next year or two to protect their investments or to protect their financial position?
Yeah, so as we know, certain areas of the state as well as the Midwest are suffering from drought-related conditions. Some areas are more favorable than others. So that's the first thing, is being aware of your surroundings with respect to moisture and try to figure out a plan, especially if you have livestock. How do we weather through the difficulty of being short on forage production or grain production or whatever the case might be? Secondly, making informed decisions. If you do choose to go out and buy things, you need to borrow money against whatever that asset might be. Be aware that land loans are increasing, and our interest rate on land loans are increasing, as we noted in the article. There was another article wrote somewhat similar to this about a year ago, and we noticed that interest rates were roughly up basically 2% year over year. So be aware of the cost of borrowing and how does that factor into your other financial considerations of your operation, and be aware of what the markets are doing. The Federal Reserve just recently raised interest rates by about 0.75%, and I guess we'll see how that impacts inflation and their monetary policies going forward with trying to combat that issue.
Very good. That is Jim Jansen, agricultural economist with Nebraska Extension and the Center for Agricultural Profitability here at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Again, you can find his new article on land values across the central U.S., cropland values, and what that means for states in our region on our website at cap.unl.edu. Jim, as always, thanks so much for your time and the great information.
Thanks for having me.
Nebraska Farmcast is a production of the Center for Agricultural Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. For the latest research-based information and education resources to manage your farm or ranch operation, visit our website at cap.unl.edu. That's cap.unl.edu.